thanks for joining us again. Those of you in the back, take your seats, because we're going to start the next session. And we've been talking this morning about creative technologies in different spaces, and I am very happy to have what is undoubtedly one of our favorite teams in this space. United Visual Artists are a name who are central, I would say, like in the European scenes for art and creative technologies. They've been existing for almost 15 years at this point, I think. More than 10 years, definitely. And they are the perfect example of the kind of agent that exists both in the art world, in the research world, and in the commercial space. They are doing massive art projects exploring the language of light and movement through information and through digital as a medium. I'm sure you have seen many of their impressive installations. They have just opened a brand new one in Australia this week. They were, of course, very well known for their first work with Massive Attack, designing the scenographies based on light and data of the Massive Attack shows. Many times. They've been playing with Massive Attack 2 times here at Sonar in the last 10 years. And they are also like a really incredible research unit. They have produced a lot of technology, a lot of tools to do the kind of work that they do, and this has found applications in other spaces. So this is also an example of how the research that artists and art collectives are doing is having an impact beyond their practice. Matt Clark is their founder. He's one of the 3 founders of UVA. He is their public face. I'm very thankful for Matt to take the time coming right from Australia to be this year with us. Matt is not only the founder of UVA, he's also a teacher at the Royal College of Art of London in the Information Experience Design. And actually, you have 2 reasons, or there's 2 pieces of work of Matt and UVA that you're going to be able to see in this festival. First, on the Market Lab, there are the installations, the black box that Matt has done with his students at the Royal College of Art as one of their tutors. But also, and this is kind of a last-minute surprise because it was literally confirmed very few days ago, United Visual Artists are doing the visuals and some of the scenography of the James Blake show that you will be able to see tonight. It just premiered a few days in London, so this is going to be like the second time to see it. And believe me, it's going to be amazing. So for all of those of you who were doubting whether you're going to Sonar by night tonight, please do, and be one of the first to see the work that United Visual Artists are doing with such a brilliant musician as James Blake. So without further ado, thank you, Matt. Matt Clark, for you.
Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me? Yep. Thank you. What an introduction. That's half of my talk done. So yeah, it's great to be here at the Sónar Festival. And you know, we've been here many times, but as Jose said, we're working on a number of projects here. And today I'm going to talk about some of our projects, a bit of history, and how we have 3 organizations that coexist together in London. And I'll start off by just introducing myself and my background. My name is obviously Matt Clark. My background is actually in fine art and design. My 2 co-founders have backgrounds in engineering and software design. And back in 2003, you know, that was quite an unusual combination of skills to have in an artistic practice. But as you can see here in Sónar+D, it's very much a familiar thing. Our first project was for the band Massive Attack, as we already know, where we designed the stage set and visual show for the 100th Window Tour. And this show revolved around real-time text information, statistics, and this information would change every day for the audience. So it required, you know, art direction, you know, engineering, physical display design, and software design. And so this project in many ways kind of defined our working process. We were curious about this method of working, so we decided to set up UVA. And we continued to work in the live performance field, but we also started making our own installation works. This is one of the first ones, that's me. Monolith at the V&A. And we continued to develop our own software platform called D3, and this became useful to others over the years, so we actually commercialized it to create another revenue stream. In recent years, we decided to separate these activities into different organizations, mainly to make it clearer how we engage with our commissioners or clients or people that buy our products. And although the purpose of art and design and engineering can be quite different, we believe that you can benefit greatly by keeping these activities close together. It's going to be impossible to go into any depth of all three organizations, but you can see here the website addresses if you want to look further. So to paint you a quick picture, UVA now focuses on its arts projects. Some of these are small, self-initiated works for the gallery space. And on a larger scale, temporary installations for institutions and public spaces, and also permanent commissions that are on more of an architectural scale. And Artisan is essentially a design studio, so it's where we work on more collaborative projects and commercial projects with bigger creative teams, and there's usually a brief set by the commissioner. And it's usually still set in a physical environment, and it's usually still experiential, but this might be performed on or filmed. And D3 Technologies is now a fully established product in its own right. It's essentially a media server for big, complex live productions. We make both the hardware and software, and it's used on these huge productions. It's used on the halftime Super Bowl show and the Grammys, and lots of people use it all around the world. This is our studio. All three organizations occupy these buildings in Borough and Southeast London. And we have traditional design studios and all sorts of different spaces. But there's also a workshop. We believe that making things, both in the physical and digital world, is very important because it often leads to new processes and new directions. And on any given day, you'll see experimentation happening in the studio. It's not just people at computers. We very much work with the mediums. This gentleman on the left here is actually Quentin Blake, a famous illustrator who illustrates Roald Dahl books. He was in our studio because he designed the cover to James Blake's album. And we've actually been capturing his drawings in 3D and turning those 3D drawings into animations. Picture of some of the UVA team here, past and present. It seems impossible to get everybody in the same place at the same time. Through all three organizations, there's over 50 people. And UVA has been really fortunate to attract some incredible individuals over time. And some people, they spend a short amount of time with us, working on very specific things, and others with us for much long periods of time. And it's really great, actually, to see people come to UVA and then go off and become very successful in their own fields when the time's right. So I like to think that we share a similar philosophy to the Bauhaus School in Germany that once was. As you probably know, the Bauhaus was a place where design, technology, and art were taught and practiced in parallel. And the combinations of these processes led to new kinds of expressions. Now, seeing that I'm the creative director of UVA and Artisan, and I don't really have much dealings with the day-to-day business of D3, I'm going to look at some projects related to the more art side of our work, but you'll still see how there's plenty of cross-pollination between the different disciplines and organizations. Our Time is our most recent installation. You can see a picture of it here. And it's currently being shown in Tasmania, of all places, in Australia, as a part of a festival called the Dark Mofo. And it's actually situated in a big disused warehouse that used to be a place where they built boats in Harbourside at the city of Hobart. And with this work, we're really asking questions about how we experience time. This installation, it really explores a relationship between expectation and perception when intersected with a physical space. And it follows an earlier work called Momentum, which was an installation that we created for the Barbican Curve Gallery in 2014. Momentum consisted of 12 pendulums, and each pendulum had its own independent light and sound source. And with that installation, the architecture was very much part of the work, the way that the sound and the light reverberated off the architecture, defined the work itself. And these pendulums would swing how you would expect a pendulum to swing, naturally. But over time, the installation would kind of slow down as if there were kind of huge gravitational forces at play. So with our time, we expanded on that because we had big, vast open space. We put 21 of these objects in a grid, and this allowed for all sorts of different compositional patterns to emerge. And we were able to play with the same ideas related to expectation and perception, but we also could play with the multiple kind of frequencies of time, allowing another dimension to the work. The initial design inspiration for the installation was inspired by the Fuku pendulum, which is a simple ball on a string which measures the Earth's rotation. And it swings on 2 axes. And our mission was to create our own Fuku pendulum, but one that we could fully control and stop anywhere in space, which is someone that specializes in physics would tell you that's a crazy idea. The design for the pendulum started here with a bag of sugar on a string, and we put this bag of sugar on a piece of string in the curve gallery and swung it in the minimum space that we had, and measured its time period and velocity. And it was our mission to make a motor-driven pendulum that had this speed and velocity, had the same speed and velocity as the bag of sugar. We knew that if we could create our own pendulum that you believed swung naturally, we could do all sorts of amazing things. Designing the pendulum started with small maquettes. This is the first prototype of the double gimbal system that we used at the top of the pendulum. Then slightly larger designs were prototyped with electrical drive systems to try and get the control. And then we edge up to kind of full-scale size drive systems, all using the laser cutter in the studio. We then moved from wood to steel. To have absolute control over the pendulums, we use very large stepper motors, 2, 1 for each axis. And you can see here the first prototype in action. We were just about, it was just about possible to get this pendulum in our studio with scaffolding and stuff, but we couldn't actually fit the whole thing. We couldn't fit the bob at the bottom, so it barely squeezed in. And you can see here it's wobbling all over the place. But this is us edging towards the motion. In parallel, we were making our software, control software, to simulate how a normal pendulum would behave. And getting one pendulum to work was a challenge, but to get a large number of them to work in unison added all sorts of other complexities. I'm going to rush through this for time. The most recent iteration with our time, you can see the visualization. As the software evolves, so do our visualization capabilities. And this is using D3 still, our platform. But it's worth noting that when you buy D3, you can't do stuff like this. So our art projects are still defining new kinds of technologies within the software that sometimes end up in the product, sometimes not. Then we started experimenting with light sources, illuminating the pendulums with 2 light sources. There was a very simple spot for low velocity movement and a thin sheet of light for high velocity. We 3D printed our own lenses, designing our own circuit boards, designing all sorts of speaker enclosures. The Bob had to weigh under 1 kilo so that we could hold it in space. So we eventually 3D printed the enclosures. The Bobs for momentum are very fragile, but the most recent iteration, we've really refined these objects. And you can see, you know, we wanted the pendulums to look very graceful, very minimal, but you can see there's a lot of elements going into the Bob. Now, this installation is still running in Australia. I've had very little time to make a documentation of it. There's a few clips that give you a sense of the movement here. And the work is in a constant transition between natural states and very unnatural states. The pendulums would go in and out of phase and slow down over time as if these big gravitational waves were flowing over the installation. So it gives you a very, very peculiar feeling of time slowing down. And because there's a speaker in each pendulum, you get all sorts of really interesting sonic things happening, such as the Doppler effect. So it's a very immersive installation. It's both meditative, but very dramatic because of the sheer scale. There'll be a good video next week on our website, so keep an eye out for that. So just to demonstrate how an art installation can also evolve into a design for a performative project. Last year, we designed our first ballet. We were commissioned by the National Opera of Paris. And here we used 3 pendulums, but with a very different approach. We were invited by the artistic director of the opera, Benjamin Mille-Pilier, to create his inaugural show for the very opulent Garnier Theatre. And the starting point for the choreography was based on these 17th century dance notations that were very kind of architectural in their nature. So we like the idea of creating dynamic spaces, bold architectural gestures, and using the pendulums to conduct the stage and the light, as if it was a performer itself. The pendulums had their own light source, but there was no sound in this situation. And what we created was a room within a room. It was a black box made from black rear projection material, and we back projected onto every surface. This allowed us to create what we call virtual lights, and this was a plugin that we made for our software, which allows us to create kind of virtual lights that run in real time. And because we know where the pendulums are pointing, we can create this virtual light to kind of interact with that. So this plugin is actually developed with a third party, a guy called Matt, who's got a company called Notch. And we've teamed up with him to design this technology. So this idea of a virtual light allows us to create all sorts of very different representations of light, from very kind of colorful and soft to quite graphic and hard-edged, all within an instant. And as you can see in this environment, you have very little time to set up. We had to, there were 3 performances every night, so we had to take this show down and up, within 15 minutes and get all the projectors aligned. It's quite a difficult environment to work in. So I'm going to show you a bit of a video here. It's about 2 minutes long, and I've sped it up. Ooh. That was quick, wasn't it? I sped up so quick that you barely saw it. Here we go. So the reason I've sped it up is because it's a very subtle piece. And I want you to see the different personalities of light which evolve over the course of half an hour. So remember here, there's no traditional lights, like theatrical lights. This is all lighting through projection. So it's a new kind of way to light performance, I guess. The music you're hearing is composed by Nico Muli, who worked on the piece with us. And the costumes were made by Iris van Herpen, who's a very forward-thinking fashion designer. You get the idea. So now I'm going to look at some smaller works, also related to our perception of time and the observation of change. These are subjects that we've explored through smaller works. This is a work called Always Never. It's a study of time through expressed through geometry, light, and algorithms. And the sculpture is made of 150 individual sundial-like objects, and each sundial has 3 arms and 3 different colors which project onto the back surface that supports it. One's orange, one's blue, one's white. And there's also a time signature allocated to each arm, seconds, minutes, and hours. And over time, these time signatures are projected onto the composition as a whole, creating these very kind of organic patterns. So this work is actually sped up here. It's interesting when you watch the work in real time. It's like watching a sunset or sunrise. You can feel it change, but you can't really grasp it. You can't see it change. And when working with light, it is very much about a feeling. It's working with ideas that are very difficult to express in words. Dramatic cut. Blueprint is another work which embraces the idea of change, and we consider Blueprint as a kind of living artwork. Only in recent years has technology enabled us to visualize evolutionary systems with some accuracy. This image by Leonard Eisenberg illustrates 3.5 billion years of life on Earth. And our work, Blueprint, uses evolutionary principles as a core theme. We were commissioned by the Philadelphia Science Center to create a work that was to be situated in the recovery center post-operation treatment. And the idea was to create a living painting that was never the same and would perpetually evolve. The aesthetic intention was to create almost like an impressionist painting that was continue evolving. And we developed this script that generated animations across a virtual canvas, and the animations were driven by the growth of virtual seeds. So instead of designing an artwork, we're designing the seeds which make the artwork. The seeds were then planted across the canvas, and they would grow and fight for survival. And this is an animation showing how that kind of works in principle. So you get this sense of growth. This isn't how the final animation looked. This is really the kind of data that's driving the artwork. The sculpture itself was made from is made from a grid of light cells, reminiscent of a kind of DNA structure sequence. And each cell had its 2 different LEDs that were diffuse. And these light sources filled each cell. We could have just displayed this script on a screen, but we really wanted to have this sculptural element to the work, and also the quality of light was very important. And the animation is very slow. The movement is barely perceivable again, and it would take up to 20 minutes for a composition like this to evolve. Again, here's some video documentation, and this has been sped up. When we installed it in Philadelphia, we put a kind of small webcam on the wall just to see what happened over time, because we just didn't know what would happen after. We had it in the studio for a couple of months, but we didn't really know what would happen after 6 months. And luckily, we haven't had to press the reset button yet. It's been there for over a year, and it's still doing kind of interesting things. Some of our work looks at our relationship with technology and how we can sometimes project a personality into something technological. This is a picture of a robot called the Sensor. It was on display at the 1970 Expo. And the Sensor was the first robotic sculpture to be controlled by a digital computer. And the idea was that this very advanced for its time. It was a robot that followed the sound and motion of people as they walked past, giving the impression that it was alive. And the public really fell in love with this object, this charming robot, until it started to malfunction, and it started to behave erratically, and this really scared the children and the audience, and it had to be kind of dismantled and put away in the cupboard. So we're interested in creating these kind of living machines, and our first one was called Monolith at the V&A, and it was a one-night project. It was one of our first installations set in the garden of the V&A Museum, and it was a simple monolith of light that we programmed this very basic personality into this object. So you would walk up to it, and it would judge you, and it would either be very pleasant with nice colors, or it would be very aggressive and scream at you and kind of make all these strobing effects. So it's really interesting watching people walk up to it. And we didn't think many people would go into the garden because it was very, very cold in the winter. But everyone just flocked to this thing like moths to a light bulb, and the interaction system actually broke, and it just ended up screaming and strobing at people all night, but they still seemed to like it. With this work, Origin, we also were interested in designing a personality into a technological object. But this also was kind of reminiscent of a kind of temple for technological worship. Like Monolith, it was programmed to have behaviors, and this time it kind of expressed itself through very simple geometries of planes of light and the cubic volumes of light, through its minimal structure. And we actually first put this just below the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, and it was this kind of ominous object that sat on the landscape, and people would just go inside this structure. So it was a kind of weird project. It was at the intersection of architecture, installation, and performance. This film is actually when we took it to San Francisco with the Creators Project, just to show it in motion. And the software, we use D3 again to program this personality. You know, it would never do the same thing twice, so it might just lay there dormant, just kind of breathing for up to 20 minutes and then erupt in a frenzy. And we worked with the sound artist Scanner, who recorded all of these phone conversations in the local neighborhood, and this installation played them back as if it was tuning into the landscape. Okay, get the idea. So vanishing point, like Origin, we refer to this project as a kind of programmable architecture sculpture. But this work actually was first started off as a design project where we designed a catwalk show, a fashion catwalk show entirely made of light. And this is an image from that catwalk show. And light isn't tangible like other materials, like wood or clay, and it's quite a difficult medium to sculpt. You have to have all sorts of environmental conditions for it to work. And Vanishing Point was initially inspired by the sketches of Alberti, Da Vinci, and Drouet. And these were artists that were masters in using technology in their art at the time. We used the vanishing point as both technique and visual outcome. It started off with a generative script which drew these compositions based on a technique that allowed us to draw with laser lights. So again, we were using D3 to create a new tool to interface with an existing technology. And a laser scanner has very limited abilities to draw geometries. There's only so many lines you can draw before it starts going wobbly and weird. But we were able to create enough complexity to draw these very interesting compositions of light. We actually projected through a series of voiles, which created these intersecting lines. And the installation is quite a meditative, again, slow-moving installation, which just creates different compositions, architectural compositions. But this idea of giving light a physicality is something that we're very fascinated by. It's interesting how you can make something that is almost invisible feel very heavy and solid. The noise that you hear is actually, we put a contact mic on the side of the laser scanner. So it's just the mechanics of the laser scanner actually operating. In this particular show at the Towner Gallery in Eastbourne, we presented this as a kind of generative painting as well, a 2D painting using the same technique. That was a projection. But we also had a series of screen prints where we kind of programmed this very analog material to create these compositions. So technology allows us to see the world from the palm of our hands, from distant wars to being very intimate with our favorite celebrities. And we consume information in such vast quantities, there's very little time to validate it. So, some could consider what we live in now is a modern day Plato's cave. Much of our collaborative work with Massive Attack explores ideas of real information versus disinformation or misinformation. We've designed about 10 tours now that explore these various themes of kind of statistical information, political information, ideas. And we've translated these shows into 37 different languages, including Japanese and Russian. And for each show, the themes would change and evolve. We've broadcasted WikiLeaks files. We've actually used leaked files and created narratives from them. These files are actually, what you can see here, from leaked internet searches from a well-known search engine. We didn't use the names, but we used the searches as a very kind of emotive narrative. And we've also, this is actually from 2003, so we present statistical information that we glean from the internet on a daily basis. about subjects that the band were very close to. Our recent iterations, we've started to design these almost artificial intelligence bots that actually take these information sources and then create their own variations of them. So, for example, news headlines, we would, on a daily basis, look at the news from that day, from celebrity to very serious, and then the computer program would make its own versions of the news and present them in a show. You see some moving image of this. And we would honestly not know what would be presented on the screen until the show. And you can see here some very weird things, very weird news headlines would be presented. Amazingly, the band haven't got into trouble with all of their claims. Get the idea. So I've always been fascinated by astronomy, cosmology, and space exploration. I could spend hours looking at images of deep space from the Hubble telescope, or Voyager getting us close to the surface of Pluto, or Mars rover Curiosity giving us this very accurate, intimate view of the surface of Mars. This picture actually was of the first image taking of the far side of the moon. So before this image, we had no idea what the other side of the moon looked like. I mean, it's a very bad image, but again, it gives you this glimpse of a place that's only visible through technological means. This is an artwork. You know, not all of our artworks have this explicit technological aspect. This is what artwork called a distant view. And in many ways, we wanted to make the intangible tangible. It looks like a photograph, but is actually a three-dimensional relief of the moon's surface. And it was inspired by the lunar mission in 1967, where NASA were looking for a safe place to land man on the moon. And they photographed of huge quantities of the surface of the moon. And they developed these pictures on board the spacecraft and then transmitted the images back to Earth, where they were painstakingly put back together to create these montages. It's very beautiful. 2 decades later, NASA sent a probe to scan the moon's surface in 3D using a laser scanner. And this information is free for the public to use. So we took this data and reconstructed the whole surface of the moon. We then took one of these photographs from the initial mission and put the 3D image on top of that and created these kind of images, which we remade actually using a laser cutter. So each slither of wood here is one scan line of data from NASA. We put these elements together, and that gave us reproduction of the moon's surface. So we've actually got an accurate surface of the moon. But because there's a curvature on the surface of the moon, it meant that the 3D image starts to fall away. And on a closer inspection, you see this kind of data loss, these data shadows. And when lit from a certain viewpoint, it all falls into place. So you see the perfect image of the moon. So I think I've timed that just about long enough to take some questions, and I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of the sort of things we do at UVA. Yeah, so I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to give the mic to whoever first wants to say something. Thank you so much for this presentation and for this amazing body of work, really. It always blows me away. So, don't be shy. Oh, over there.
Hey, man. Thank
Hello.
you for fantastic presentations, very inspirational work.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a very boring question.
That's all right.
You referred in the beginning to your business model.
Yeah.
Essentially, you've created like spin-offs
Yes.
from a design studio or artistic studio. Where do you make your money? Which one of these three companies essentially sustain? So in other words, is D3 paying for the research work of United Visual Artists, or how does it work?
Well, you know, we've always been self-sufficient, and our accountant wants all organizations to be profitable, thank you very much. And although the initial intention was really to create these spin-offs to generate another revenue stream, we still end up being really passionate about them. They're not just commercial entities to make money, thank you very much. We're very passionate about them. And in fact, you know, each organization is actually quite self-sufficient, it turns out. So even though the initial intention was to try to commercialize some of our IP in areas which we thought would be easier to make it, it's not really turned out to be the case. And I might add, you know, taking a product to market is not an easy way to make a buck. It's fraught with all sorts of challenges of its own. So, yeah, we were probably a bit naive thinking that in the first place. But, you know, we're very proud of all three organizations. And I hate to be put in a box. Personally, it's like all of these activities are very creative. And, you know, I guess we've done it because someone that wants to buy a product wants to know it comes from a product company and not some crazy bunch of artists. You know, it's a psychological thing probably. And it's not actually made by crazy artists. It's actually a very strong team of software engineers, and it's its own entity. But what I wanted to touch upon was that by living in the same environment and having a continued conversation, we can greatly benefit from each other still, even though that we're separate organizations in many respects.
Okay, over there, and I think that's basically it.
Thanks. Could you talk a bit more about how the collaboration with Quentin and James Blake came about, and like where that came from, and how you chose what direction to take it in, and that kind of stuff?
Okay, so yeah, that was a little teaser, wasn't it? I was going to try and put together some material for that because we're actually working on a project. You know, we work with a number of performing artists. We've been working on a live show for James Blake for some time. The beginnings of that will be premiere tonight, although we did a show last week. So we've had this conversation for a long time, and it turned out that Quentin Blake designed James Blake's record cover, his most recent album. And they're not related, by the way, by family, they're just a coincidence. And we thought, we were talking to the manager about, you know, how we've got this thing we're doing for the live, and it's got its own kind of philosophical considerations and approach of mixing the virtual with physical and all sorts of things like that. And we thought, but the manager said, well, what could you do with Quentin Blake? And the guy, Alexei, who designed the record cover, said, had these pictures of Picasso creating these light drawings. I said, could we do something like that? You work with light, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you could, but that works well as a still image, but in motion, that's not so interesting. So in our studio, we're kind of lucky enough to have VR development kits and all sorts of sensors and stuff. So we set up this rig which allowed Quentin to draw in 3D space. So we set up this shoot and put some music on, and he would just draw in space. And we've taken those data sets and we've put them in a post-production process, and we're currently making animations which will eventually turn into treatments for the live show. There may be something tonight, but I can't promise anything. So it's really, really brilliant. Well, he's 84, right? And to see him really engage with this process was really quite special. We've had a lot of really famous people in our studios over the years, but Quentin Blake is probably hands down the most awe-inspiring person. You know, everybody knows his work, has grown up with it, right? So, very interesting.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Just wanted to follow up on the really interesting question about your business model by asking a bit more about how you guys kind of divide your energy and divide your resources and your personnel in terms of the projects that you presented to us. Some of them are commissions, others I imagine were ideas that you guys had or work for different clients. How do you sort of manage that separation in terms of your time, your energy, and your creativity and the resources of the studio?
Yeah. Well, each different organization has its own full-time kind of people. And I guess when we started to commercialize the software, we had to kind of divide and conquer a bit. So Ash, who is the brains behind the software side of things on our creative projects, he kind of went and focused more on the software full time, and Chris equally on the production kind of projects. And myself, I mainly focus on the artistic projects, you know, conducting the studio, and doing most of the creative direction. There's still lots of crossover and conversations, but yeah, you can't. We've had to kind of divide and conquer in many respects, and focus on particular areas to really kind of evolve and mature our work and take it to the a progressive state, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy having these different operations. They are very different. You know, art, design, making a product. They're very different disciplines, and they have very different purposes in the world. So it can be quite difficult. But I think the benefits outweigh the cons in a way.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for the question. Thanks, Matt. I was just checking very fast on that because, like, I just wanted to say that the James Blake show is tonight, 1 a.m. at the Sonar Club stage, in case you want to see more of the wonderful work of United Visual Artists. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you.